Let me ask you something that might rattle the dust off your thinking. What if you were sent? Not just born, but sent. Not just living, but assigned. What if your life is not some random scattering of days, but a divine appointment? I believe that. I've always believed that. I believe there's a seat with your name on it at the table of purpose. A mission custom fitted to your fingerprints. But here's the sobering truth. Your seat is still empty. Not because it wasn't prepared, but because you haven't taken it. And if you don't take it, then who will? I don't ask that to shame you. I ask it to summon you. Because if you've been drifting, hoping someone else would step up, hoping life would just work itself out, let me be the voice that calls you back. There's a reason your story hasn't ended. There's a reason you're still breathing. You are here because something still needs to be done that only you can do in the way you were wired to do it. And I say that not with hype, but with humility. Because the world is not suffering from a shortage of time. It's suffering from a shortage of people willing to take responsibility for the time they've been given. Let me give you the picture I want burned into your memory. An empty chair. Right now, in the house of your destiny, there's a chair meant for a leader, a builder, a finisher. That chair doesn't have someone else's name on it. It has yours. And for too long, it's sat untouched. Not because you're unqualified, but because you've doubted, because you've stalled, because fear got a louder vote than vision. But I'll tell you something about fear. It doesn't have to be defeated before you act. It just has to be disobeyed. So let me lay it out plain. If not you, then who? Who's going to speak up in your family when silence is destroying trust? Who's going to show your children what discipline looks like when it's hard? Who's going to rebuild what's broken in your community, your business, your household, if not you? This isn't theory. This is reality. There's no one else coming. There is no backup version of you. There's just you and time. And time has already made its decision. It's going to keep moving. It's you that must decide if you'll move with it. Now, some people say, well, I don't feel called. That's fine. Let me make it simple. If you're alive, you're called. If you can hear this message, you're not finished. There's no such thing as neutral ground when it comes to your assignment. You're either sitting in that chair or you're watching someone else sit in it, someone who may not even care, someone who may not steward what you were meant to build. And that's the greatest tragedy. Not that someone else wins, but that you forfeited. So I'm going to ask you again, slow and steady. If not you, then who? If you don't rise early, who will? If you don't stay late, who will? If you don't teach your children discipline, who will? If you don't fight for your dream, who will? If you don't step into your purpose, don't you dare assume someone else will do it with your conviction, with your love, with your vision. They won't. That's the truth. That's why this message isn't just about success. It's about stewardship. It's about maturity. It's about identity. This isn't a motivational phrase. It's a mirror. And what you see when you look into it determines the legacy you leave. So I challenge you, from this moment on, live like someone sent, walk like someone assigned, show up like someone who's got a chair to fill, because you do. You know, when I talk to people who've been stuck for a while, stuck in a job they don't like, stuck in habits that drain them, stuck in relationships that aren't growing, I often hear a very polite phrase. It sounds nice. It sounds reasonable. But I've learned to recognize it as the most dangerous form of self-sabotage. They say, I'm just waiting. And it sounds responsible, doesn't it? Waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for motivation. Waiting for a sign. But let me speak clearly to that today. Waiting, when you already know what needs to be done, is not wisdom. It's not discernment. It's disobedience. And I don't mean that in a harsh, religious way. I mean it in the way that life works. You've already been told. You've already seen the pattern. You've already felt the nudge. And every time you ignore it, you're not just stalling, you're walking in the opposite direction of the life you were given to live. You say, but Jim, I don't want to make a mistake. I understand that. Nobody wakes up hoping to fail. But let me tell you something that changed my life when I finally got it. A mistake made in motion is 1,000 times more redeemable than a lifetime spent sitting still. You can correct a wrong turn. You can steer a moving car. But you can't steer parked potential. You can't coach hesitation. You can't reap where you haven't sown. And that's what delay really is. It's a denial of the law of sowing and reaping. You know the law. It's as old as time. You plant in the spring, you harvest in the fall. You can't pray for a crop in October when you never broke the ground in March. Life doesn't work that way. Business, doesn't work that way. Marriage doesn't work that way. And purpose surely doesn't work that way. I call it the tax of delayed obedience. And let me tell you, it compounds. Every day you wait adds interest to the cost of the life you say you want. You think you're playing it safe. But the truth is, you're quietly going broke on potential, quietly bleeding out years of impact while you tell yourself, I'm just not ready. Ready? Who told you that readiness was the requirement? Readiness is a myth. Nobody is ready to do something they've never done. Nobody feels prepared to step into a role they've never played. You don't need to be ready. You need to be willing. Willing to show up. Willing to begin. Willing to start before you feel qualified. That's not recklessness. That's responsibility. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a man with a sealed envelope in his hands. Inside is his assignment. It contains the map to his future, the instructions for his calling. But instead of opening it, he places it in a drawer and tells himself, I'll read it when I'm sure I can follow it perfectly. That drawer is full of good intentions. It's full of one-day dreams. But good intentions don't reap harvests. Only action does. That envelope doesn't open itself. That mission doesn't fulfill itself. And that drawer, let me tell you, is where too many people's futures go to die, not in rebellion, but in delay, not in failure, but in indecision, not in hatred, but in hesitation. Here's the truth, and it may sting a bit. Life doesn't pause for your uncertainty. The seasons do not wait for your courage. Spring comes, whether you feel confident or not. The window opens, and then it closes. And if you don't plant, you don't reap. Not because the world is cruel, but because the world is just. It respects decisions. It honors movement. It rewards discipline. But it cannot give fruit to a field that's never been touched by a plow. That's why delay is disobedience. Not because life is punishing you, but because it's inviting you, and you keep saying, later. I say today, let later die. Let it go. Let go of the myth that the stars will align before you begin. Let go of the lie that one day it'll feel easy. It won't, but you'll be ready once you start. I promise you that. You were made for the action. You were made for the stretch. And on the other side of that obedience is not just achievement, it's transformation. You'll become someone else, someone better, someone faithful, someone firm. So the next time you hear that voice whispering, I'm just waiting, stop yourself. Ask the question, waiting or disobeying? And if you already know what needs to be done, do it. Not tomorrow, not next week, not once you feel perfect. Do it today. Because the longer you wait, the heavier the weight becomes. And you were never meant to carry the weight of delay. You were meant to carry out a mission. Don't leave it unopened. There's a moment in every person's life where the voice becomes unmistakable, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. It doesn't come from the outside. It rises from within. It says, you already know. And the moment you hear it, there are only two choices left. Move or postpone. That voice doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't need to argue, convince, or plead. It simply reminds you of what you already know you're supposed to do. And my friend, let me be the one to confirm that voice for you today. Yes, that's the thing. That project you've been putting off, that conversation you've been avoiding, that decision you keep circling, that change you've been rehearsing in your mind 1,000 times. Yes, that's the one. Step forward. Now I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, but what if I'm wrong? That's fair. But I'll tell you something even more dangerous than being wrong. It's being inactive when you're right. You see, the tragedy is not in trying and failing. It's in knowing and stalling. That's where the real damage comes in. Because knowledge without action becomes self-betrayal. And nothing erodes your self-respect faster than seeing the gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do. You can lie to others, but you can't lie to your own conscience. It remembers. It keeps score. And every time you delay, it withdraws a little more of your belief in yourself. I want to say this slowly so it lands. The commanded action is already in your hands. You're not waiting on more clarity. You're not lacking instruction. The issue is not information, it's initiative. You already know the task. You already know the cost. You already know the time. And the longer you let that knowledge sit idle, the harder it becomes to move. Motion has a moral quality to it. Not because movement itself is sacred, but because the right movement, at the right time, when it's been commanded by your own internal compass, that kind of movement becomes obedience. That's what this is. This isn't a hustle. This isn't ambition for ambition's sake. This is obedience to what you've already been given. Now, I want you to hear this not just as a principle, but as a mirror. Look into it. What would change in your life if you simply did what you already knew to do? Think about that. Don't rush past it. If you just acted on the knowledge you've already received, the books you've already read, the mentors you've already heard, the truths you've already agreed with, how much would begin to shift? See, it's not that you lack wisdom, you lack execution. And execution is where the gap closes. Execution is where self-trust is rebuilt. Execution is where identity takes form, not in what you say you value, but in what you consistently act upon. So let me ask it again. In the only way that matters, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Who's going to forgive first? Who's going to write the plan? Who's going to turn off the screen and turn on their life? Who's going to take that first awkward, halting step forward, not because it feels good, but because it's right? This is the kind of step that doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need a cheerleading squad or a viral quote. It only needs one thing: your willingness to be faithful to the wisdom you already possess. You see, the great mistake people make is thinking that obedience is for the spiritual elite, the disciplined few, the naturally motivated. No, it's for anyone who chooses to respond to what they already know. The gap between you and the next level of your life is not talent. It's not connections. It's not luck. It's repeated obedience to simple instruction. That's it. And the person who does that, who shows up and shows up and shows up again, is the person who begins to walk in transformation. And here's the beautiful truth. Each time you obey, each time you step forward, each time you act in accordance with what you know, the next step becomes clearer. The fog doesn't lift all at once, but the ground beneath your feet gets firmer. The doubt doesn't disappear, but it loses its voice. Why? Because obedience reinforces identity, and identity dictates action. And when you do what you said you would do, when you live in alignment with what you already know to be true, you start to trust yourself again. And self-trust, my friend, is the fuel of destiny. So today, don't wait for another revelation. Don't sit around waiting for some divine lightning bolt to strike. You've already been told. The map is already drawn. The instruction has already been given. And the only question left to ask is, will you move? Will you take the next step? Not the perfect one, not the final one, just the next one. Because when you do, you're no longer drifting. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer at the mercy of life. You're finally participating in it, fully, deliberately, obediently. And in that act of obedience, the story begins to change, not someday, but today. So take the step forward. Let me tell you something I've learned over a lifetime of watching, working, listening, and failing forward. The way a person handles the small things tells you everything you need to know about how they'll handle the big things. I'm talking about the quiet disciplines, the invisible decisions, the private choices no one sees but you. That's where belief lives or dies. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking what you believe in public, when the cameras are on and the spotlight's warm. I'm asking what you do when it's cold and dark and no one's clapping. Because real belief isn't just something you profess, it's something you practice. And if you want to see what a person really believes, watch how they manage the small. Do they get up when the alarm goes off? Or do they snooze the mission 5 times and call it self-care? Do they put the shopping cart back or do they leave it for someone else to clean up? Do they show up when they said they would, even when they don't feel like it? Or do they ghost their own commitments and dress it up as freedom? These might seem like minor things, but don't let the size fool you. Small acts shape large identities. And the person who is casual with the small is usually casual with the great, not because they're evil, not because they're incapable, but because they haven't yet learned that discipline isn't just about effort. It's about evidence. It's the proof of belief. You see, discipline in the small says, I trust what I said when I felt strong, even when I feel weak. That's what separates the casual from the committed. Not talent, not charisma, not IQ. Just this. One person says, this matters. And I'll treat it accordingly even when no one is watching. Because the truth is, no one may ever see those quiet disciplines, but they will always feel their fruit. You can't hide the long-term effects of small obedience. It always shows up somewhere, either in what you build or in what you forfeit. And here's the thing, every act of small discipline is a vote for the person you're becoming. Every time you make your bed, every time you drink water instead of soda, every time you spend 10 minutes reading instead of scrolling, you're casting a vote. This is who I am. And over time, those votes accumulate into character, and character becomes destiny. And it all started with whether or not you brushed your teeth turned off the TV, stood up straight, or took 10 quiet minutes to write in your journal. Not big things, not flashy things, just small, repetitive, ordinary obedience. Now, I know what the world says. The world says, if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. If no one sees it, it doesn't count. If it's small, it's not worth it. But let me tell you what I've seen over and over again. The people who go far, the people who rise, build, lead, and last, they're the ones who live by a different law. They live by the law of integrity. That means they do the right thing when no one's watching. They hold themselves accountable to invisible standards. They manage their time and energy like it belongs to something bigger than themselves. Why? Because it does. And here's the deeper truth. Small obedience is the training ground for great responsibility. You don't graduate into a life of purpose by skipping the fundamentals. You don't become trustworthy in the storm if you weren't dependable in the calm. You don't become a man or woman of your word when it's expensive if you weren't already faithful when it was free. Every great act of faithfulness has its roots in 1,000 unseen decisions, early mornings, honest confessions, closed doors, quiet yeses, and each one matters more than you think. That's why I say, show me your mornings, and I'll show you your future. Not because mornings are magical, but because they're measurable. They tell the truth. What you do before the world starts pulling on you, that's where your belief is clearest. That's where your real theology is lived. You can say you believe in stewardship, but if your morning is chaos and confusion, your life will follow suit. You can say you believe in growth, but if your days are filled with reaction instead of intention, you're lying to yourself, and life won't be fooled. So here's the invitation. Pick something small and start honoring it. Pick one habit, one discipline, one act of obedience that no one will clap for, and do it with excellence. Make it a ritual. Make it a vow. Not because someone told you to, but because you know who you're becoming, because you respect your future, because you believe the work matters even when no one's watching. That's what belief looks like. Not in theory, in practice. And the man or woman who learns to obey in the small will not shrink when the stakes get high. They'll already be built, brick by brick, habit by habit, line by line. You see, the secret to a remarkable life isn't a leap. It's the accumulation of invisible obedience. That's how you earn the right to be trusted with more, by being ruthlessly faithful with less. So if you want to show what you believe, don't shout it. Don't write it in the sky. Live it quietly, deliberately, daily. Because obedience in the small is the soil where every dream is grown. Obedience in the invisible now, that's where the real test begins. It's one thing to stay disciplined when someone's watching, when the lights are on, when the applause is audible. But what about the work that happens in silence? What about the effort that gets no praise, no recognition, no applause? That's the realm most people abandon. It's where the seeds are planted, but the harvest is still far off. It's where the work is lonely, the process is long, and the results are not immediate. And yet, it's exactly in this invisible space where the foundation of greatness is laid. Let me give you a picture. Imagine a garden behind a high wall. No one can see into it but you. You water, you weed, you nourish the soil. Day after day, season after season, you go back to that garden. And from the outside, it looks like nothing's happening. People pass by and don't even notice. There are no crowds, no camera crews, no breaking news, just you and the dirt. But over time, slowly, silently, that soil begins to yield life. First under the surface, then at the surface, and finally above it. And when the fruit appears, it appears suddenly to others, but not to you. You knew it was coming because you were there when it was invisible. That's how obedience works. Most people want visible results from invisible work, and they want it fast. But life doesn't operate on demand. It operates on law. And the law is this. What you cultivate in the dark eventually shows up in the light, but only if you keep showing up. That's the part people miss. They start watering the seed, but when nothing sprouts in a week, they abandon the field. They say it's not working. But what they really mean is, I want the fruit without the patience. I want the outcome without the character. I want the visibility without the obscurity. And that's not how life works. That's not how legacy is built. That's not how purpose is fulfilled. If not you, then who will obey in the silence? Who will keep showing up to the invisible work when the world is too noisy, too distracted, too impatient? Who will guard their garden when no one's clapping, no one's validating, no one's cheering them on? That's the call. That's the test. Because the one who can be trusted in the invisible can be trusted with the visible. And the one who is shaped in silence is the one who will have something of substance to say when the microphone is finally handed to them. Now let's get practical. What does invisible obedience look like? It looks like waking up early to write when the book deal hasn't come. It looks like showing up at the gym when the scale hasn't moved. It looks like praying when the answers are still out of reach. It looks like budgeting when no one knows you're rebuilding your life from scratch. It looks like fasting from distractions when the world screams for entertainment. It looks like practicing your presentation in an empty room. It looks like forgiving someone who never apologized, giving your best work when your name isn't on the credits, staying when it would be easier to leave. And it's not just about discipline for discipline's sake. It's about aligning your behavior with your belief. It's about building internal integrity where the outside matches the inside. It's about becoming someone who lives by values, not moods. And that kind of person is rare. That kind of person is respected. That kind of person carries weight when they speak because you can feel the depth of who they've become in the dark. You can feel the years of invisible investment behind their visible strength. Here's the irony of the invisible. Eventually, it becomes undeniable. That marriage that no one thought would survive, it starts to shine. That business that began in a basement, it starts to boom. That man who walked away from shortcuts, he becomes someone others want to follow. But it never started with a spotlight. It started with a quiet choice to honor the process, a quiet choice to remain faithful when no one asked them to, a quiet choice to believe that the work mattered, even when no one was watching. So let me challenge you with a question. What invisible area of your life are you neglecting? Where have you stopped watering because you haven't seen fruit? Where have you told yourself it doesn't matter because no one else can see it? That's the place. That's the assignment. That's where you go back. Because that hidden ground may be the most sacred part of your life. It may be the very place where your next season is being prepared, but only if you return to it. Only if you take up the tools again. Only if you say yes to the invisible. Remember this. The visible is built by the invisible. The seen is shaped by the unseen. And what you do in private will always echo in public. Not immediately, but inevitably. So guard your garden. Stay at your post. Keep tending to the field no one else applauds. Because in the invisible, belief becomes real, identity becomes forged, and discipline real, tested, internal discipline proves itself not by being loud, but by being loyal. Obedience over time. Now, this is where most people fall short. They're not lazy, they're not unmotivated, they're simply unprepared for the length of the journey. They confuse a sprint for a marathon. They start with enthusiasm, with spark, with the fire of a new beginning, but somewhere along the way, that fire flickers. The shine wears off, and the hard truth sets in. This won't be quick. This won't be easy. And it surely won't be over in a month. The results you want, the person you're becoming, the life you're building, it all demands one thing more than any other. Consistency. Day in, day out. Over time. Not perfect, but faithful. You see, time is the great equalizer. Time reveals what hype hides. Time exposes what talk tries to cover. A man can fool the world for a day, for a week, maybe even for a season. But time tells the truth. And if you give it long enough, you'll either be found faithful or found out. That's why I say, the greatest commitment you can make to your future is not a burst of inspiration. It's a vow to obey again and again when the inspiration is gone. Because real transformation isn't marked by intensity. It's marked by duration. It's not what you can do for a week. It's what you do for a year, for 5 years, for 10. So let me ask you a question I've asked thousands of people over the years. If I had followed you around for the last 90 days, just quietly observing, would I have seen obedience or delay? Would I have seen discipline or distraction? Would I have watched a person serious about their future or a person casually hoping it works out? You can tell everything about someone's trajectory by watching what they repeatedly do. Not once in a while, not when it's convenient, but when it's hard, when it's boring, when no one's checking. That's when the real work is done. That's where legacy is shaped. There's a rhythm to obedience, and you can hear it in the lives of those who've stayed the course. It sounds like this: rise early, do the work, honor the promise, reflect, adjust, repeat. Not glamorous, not viral, but it produces compound interest in every area of life. And here's the thing about compound interest: it doesn't show up immediately. But once it does, it shows up with force. That's why you can't stop after 30 days. You can't quit in month 2, because the breakthrough doesn't come on your schedule. It comes on obedience's schedule, and obedience has no shortcuts. Let's talk about seasons for a moment. Nature has 4 of them, and so do we. There's spring, when the ideas are new and the energy is high. Summer, when the work is hard and the sun is hot. Autumn, when you reap what you've sown. And winter, oh, winter when the ground is cold and nothing seems to be growing. And it's in winter that most people give up. They think it's over. They think it's broken. But what they don't realize is that roots are still growing in winter. Foundations are being strengthened. And if you can stay obedient through your winters, you'll be ready for your harvests. Obedience over time doesn't just build results. It builds identity. The longer you stay consistent, the more your belief becomes unshakable. Because you're not just believing in an outcome anymore. You're believing in who you've become. You no longer say, I hope I can stick with it. You say, this is who I am now. And that, my friend, is power. That's transformation. That's the moment when discipline becomes desire, when habits become heritage, when routines become rituals. And the world can feel that kind of presence. It's the kind of presence that walks into a room and says, without speaking, this person has paid the price. This person has stayed. So if you're tired, good. It means you're human. But don't confuse fatigue with failure. Don't confuse repetition with stagnation. You're not stuck, you're building. Brick by brick, word by word, rep by rep, day by day. And time is not your enemy. It's your proof. It's the thing that will one day confirm what you always knew in your heart, that you were doing the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons, even when it took longer than you thought it would. Stay faithful, stay planted, stay obedient, because in time, time will tell your story. And when it does, let it tell one of consistency, character, and quiet, unstoppable discipline. Now let's talk about obedience under pressure. Because it's one thing to be disciplined when things are easy, when the sun is out, the bills are paid, the calendar is calm, and the emotions are stable. But that's not the true test of obedience. No, the test comes when the pressure rises, when the storm moves in, when the results don't show up on time, when the support dries up, when the people you counted on disappear, and all you've got left is your commitment to what you said you'd do. That's the proving ground. That's where obedience either deepens into character or collapses into excuse. Pressure has a way of revealing things. It doesn't create weakness, it exposes it. It doesn't invent inconsistency, it just makes it impossible to hide. The person who folds under pressure wasn't undone by the moment. They were exposed by it. And on the other hand, the person who stays under pressure, who keeps showing up, keeps doing the work, keeps holding the line, that's someone whose discipline isn't skin deep, it's bone deep. It's wired into their identity. Not because they enjoy the pain, not because they have some superhuman drive, but because they've made a decision. This matters more than how I feel. Let me say that again, because it's the hinge point. Obedience is when the mission matters more than the mood. That's what separates those who finish from those who falter. It's not that the finishers never feel overwhelmed. It's not that they never feel doubt or discouragement. It's that they refuse to let feelings veto what they've already decided. They don't let pressure rewrite the vision. They don't let emotion negotiate with discipline. They feel everything, yes, but they obey anyway. And in that decision, day after day, they build something very few people ever possess: inner strength that doesn't crack under weight. Now, if you're under pressure right now, if your finances are tight, your relationships are strained, your body is tired, your dreams feel distant, let me speak to you directly. This is not your end. This is your forge. This is where your character is being tempered like steel. This is where your identity is being refined in fire. And if you can stay steady now, if you can hold your ground, if you can keep sowing even when it looks like the field is barren, you will emerge with a kind of strength that cannot be taught in comfort. It can only be earned in pressure, but you've got to make a choice. Will you obey your emotions or will you obey your principles? Because the two rarely agree. Your emotions will say, quit, hide, lash out, take the easy road. Your principles will say, stay, stand, endure, rise. And in that moment of tension, what you choose reveals what you really serve. Are you serving comfort or are you serving calling? Are you obeying the fear or are you obeying the truth you said you believed before the pressure hit? Let me give you a picture. Imagine a soldier standing guard through the night. Rain pouring, cold biting, eyes burning from exhaustion. But he doesn't abandon his post. Why? Because the mission matters. Because the lives behind him matter. Because he made a vow, and that vow doesn't expire when it gets hard. That's what discipline under pressure looks like. You stay at your post, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And if not you, then who? Who will protect the integrity of your dream? Who will fight for your values when culture bends? Who will show your children what perseverance looks like when the winds of life howl? Don't make the mistake of thinking discipline under pressure means perfection. No, it just means presence. You stay in the fight. You get up when you fall. You adjust, but you don't abandon. You rest, but you don't retreat. You admit when it's heavy, but you don't hand over the reins. You say, "This is my life. These are my decisions, and I will not give away my authority just because it hurts today." That's maturity. That's obedience that lasts. So if you're in a hard season, let this be your reminder. It's not about how loud your confidence is. It's about how consistent your actions are. Don't worry if your faith feels small. Just keep obeying. Don't worry if your motivation feels weak. Just keep moving. Don't wait for the pressure to grow under it. And in time, the weight that once felt unbearable will become the very thing that built your strength, because the pressure will pass. But the person you become under it, that's what will remain. Let's talk about Abraham Lincoln, not as a president, not as a legend, but as a man. A man who failed more times than most people can count. A man who battled doubt, depression, and delay. A man who lost elections, lost children, lost businesses, and yet kept showing up. Why? Because something inside him refused to let failure have the final word. He was not the most talented man in the room. He wasn't the wealthiest, the best connected, or the most charming. But he had something most men lack, a quiet resolve to obey the call of his conscience, no matter how long it took and no matter how heavy it felt. You see, when we think of history, we often see the highlight reel, the speeches, the victories, the memorials carved in stone. But what we don't see is the long road behind it, the road paved with small, invisible, obedient choices. Lincoln didn't wake up one day as a national hero. He walked through years of being overlooked, underappreciated, mocked, misunderstood. But he kept going. And not because he was certain. No, the truth is, Lincoln was a man deeply acquainted with uncertainty. But what separated him from so many others was this. He didn't let uncertainty become inactivity. That's the model. That's the standard. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs willing ones. It needs people who will rise in the dark and walk into rooms where they're not the favorite, not the fastest, not the most impressive, but they show up anyway. And Lincoln did that over and over again. He obeyed what he believed was right long before the world agreed with him. And that's what obedience often looks like. Acting on principle when approval is absent. Standing on values when votes are scarce. Building something meaningful when recognition is nowhere to be found. Lincoln didn't win his first election or his second. He didn't rise like a rocket. He rose like a tide, slow, steady, relentless. Because he believed that the right thing was still the right thing, even when it didn't feel good, even when it didn't look promising, even when no one else seemed to care. And that, right there, is the heart of this message. If not him, then who? Who else would have stayed the course when the pressure mounted, when the Civil War ripped a nation in two, when every advisor in the room told him to fold, to compromise, to cut corners? But he didn't, because he was already practiced in obedience. His years of obscurity had trained him for leadership. His seasons of private discipline had prepared him for public trial. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're not winning yet. Maybe you're not being recognized. Maybe you're still sitting in the quiet, still tending to the work that no one sees. Let Lincoln's life remind you, it counts. It all counts. The failures, the setbacks, the lonely nights, the silent prayers, the job applications that went unanswered, the ideas that no one believed in, the dreams you had to hold on to when no one else saw the vision. All of it was training. All of it was preparing you for the moment when the world would need your strength, when the weight would fall on your shoulders and the spotlight would turn your way. And in that moment, if you've been obedient in the shadows, you'll be ready in the light. Because greatness isn't born in applause. It's built in obscurity. It's shaped in seasons of small faithfulness. And if Abraham Lincoln, an awkward, uncertain, self-taught country lawyer, can become one of the most impactful leaders the world has ever seen, not because of perfection, but because of obedience, then so can you. So can anyone who refuses to give up when it's inconvenient, who refuses to disappear when it's hard, who keeps showing up not because of ego, but because of assignment. You don't have to be the most talented, but you do have to be available. You have to be willing to say, I'll go, I'll stand, I'll stay. And if the world asks why, you don't have to give them an explanation. You just have to give them your consistency. That's what legacy is made of. That's what people remember, not the talent, but the tenacity. Not the applause, but the alignment. The daily decision to do what's right, even when it's costly, even when it's lonely, even when it's slow. So I'll ask it again. If not you, then who? If not now, then when? And if not here, in the life you've been given, with the gifts you already have, in the place where your feet stand today, then where? Let Lincoln be your reminder that history turns not on the backs of perfect men, but on the obedience of ordinary ones who choose to stand where others sit, to speak where others shrink, and to build when others run. Let's bring it down to the daily now, the ritual, the law, the rhythm that shapes who you become long after the inspiration has faded and the emotion has worn off. Because what you do every day is more powerful than what you do once in a while. Discipline isn't built in bursts. It's built in rituals. It's not about intensity, it's about identity. That's why I want to hand you something simple today, something practical, something repeatable, a daily obedience code. 3 lines, spoken each morning. Not for hype, not for magic, but for alignment. Because your words, repeated with intention, have the power to form a structure around your day that emotion cannot tear down. And it goes like this. I rise when I don't feel like rising. I act before I feel ready. I obey what I already know to do. Say it slow. Let it hit. This isn't positive thinking. This is personal architecture. This is identity scaffolding. These aren't mantras. These are marching orders. Because if you don't give your day a mission, the world will give it a distraction. If you don't decide what you believe before the day begins, your environment will decide it for you. That's why you need a ritual, a line in the sand, a declaration that separates who you've been from who you're choosing to become. Let me break it down. I rise when I don't feel like rising. Why? Because feelings don't have the authority to decide your future. If I waited to feel good before I got up, I'd have wasted most of my life. Rising is not about motivation, it's about ownership. It's the first battle of the day. And if you win it, you step into your day with leverage, with momentum, with integrity. Not because you feel strong, but because you chose to rise anyway. That's the difference between drifting and directing your life. You rise not because the bed is uncomfortable, but because the mission is too important. I act before I feel ready. That's obedience. You already know what to do, so do it. Read the page. Make the call. Write the proposal. Apologize. Plan the week. Take the next step. Readiness is a myth. What you're really waiting for is certainty, and certainty never shows up in advance. Action creates certainty. Action creates feedback. Action creates progress. So act not recklessly, but faithfully. Act while the idea is still fresh. Act while the window is still open. Because obedience doesn't wait for full confidence. It waits only long enough to hear the call and then it moves. And finally, I obey what I already know to do. There it is, the cornerstone of a meaningful life. You don't need new wisdom until you've acted on what you already have. People wander from seminar to seminar, book to book, video to video, chasing a new insight when what they really need is follow through on the old one. Your transformation doesn't come from more content. It comes from more consistency. So obey what you already know, because life won't reward what you admire. It rewards what you apply. If you already know the next right step, stop searching and start stepping. Your life will thank you for it. And here's the beauty. The more you live these 3 lines, the more they live in you. They stop sounding like discipline and start sounding like truth. You stop reciting them and you start embodying them. They become the way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you make decisions. You become a person who rises without delay, a person who acts without drama, a person who obeys without needing to feel ready, inspired, or validated. And that's where the future begins, not in possibility, but in practice. I want you to imagine for a moment, 5 years from now, who are you? Where are you? What does your life look like if you live these 3 lines every day for 5 years? No hype, no shortcuts. Just slow, steady, silent obedience. Think about it. Who would you become? What would you build? How many people would your discipline influence? That's not a fantasy. That's a possibility. But only if you commit to the practice, not once in a while, every day. Especially the ones where it feels pointless. Especially the ones where no one claps. Because those are the days where your future is built. Obedience is not an event, it's a pattern. And once you establish it, everything else begins to fall in line. Confidence comes, clarity sharpens, purpose reveals itself. Not because the world changes, but because you did. You stopped waiting for conditions to be perfect, and you started planting anyway. And in time, your harvest will come not because you got lucky, but because you were loyal. So write it down, put it on your mirror, tape it to your door, say it before your feet hit the floor. Every single day. I rise when I don't feel like rising. I act before I feel ready. I obey what I already know to do. And when you live those words, not just say them, you'll look up one day and realize you've become the kind of person others can count on. The kind of person your younger self would be proud of. The kind of person this world needs more of, not perfect, but present, not loud, but loyal, not finished, but faithful. Now we come to the final moment, not the end of the message, but the beginning of a new way of living. This is the part where the truth becomes a charge, where reflection becomes decision, where insight becomes identity. Because you can't walk through everything we've explored, obedience in the small, obedience in the invisible, obedience over time, obedience under pressure, and walk away casual. No, that kind of truth requires a response. It demands something of you. And what it demands is not perfection, not performance, but obedience. The simple, resolute act of doing what you've been called to do now. So let me say it as clearly as I can, and may it echo in your mind long after this video fades. From this day forward, I no longer wait for a sign, I act. I no longer stall in fear. I no longer consult my feelings for permission. I no longer wait for the applause or the weather to turn in my favor. I move. I obey. I step into the life that's been asking for me to take responsibility for it. Because I've come to understand this great truth. Obedience isn't something I do once I feel strong. It's the very thing that makes me strong. It builds me, shapes me, stretches me. It forms a spine where I once had indecision. It gives weight to my words and direction to my days. And hear me on this, it's not about doing something grand. It's about doing something true. The most powerful lives are not the loudest. They are the most aligned. The ones that live from a deep inner resolve, not to impress, not to perform, but to be faithful. Faithful to the call, faithful to the quiet instruction, faithful to what they already know to do. That's where the power lives, not in brilliance, but in follow-through. You show me someone who's consistent, and I'll show you someone who leaves a legacy. Because at the end of the day, the world isn't changed by the dramatic. It's changed by the dependable. It's not the ones who shout, but the ones who show up every single day. And so we return to the question, simple and haunting. If not you, then who? Who will rise early and honor the day? Who will stay late and finish the task? Who will lead with integrity, live with conviction, and obey without needing applause? Who will keep their promises when the pressure mounts, guard their values when the crowd sways, and finish their race when it gets hard? If not you, then who? Don't assume someone else will do what you were made to do. Don't pass the torch when you were born to carry it. Don't delay what only you can fulfill. That chair we talked about, the one with your name on it, is still empty. And if you don't sit in it, it will remain vacant. Not because you weren't called, not because you weren't worthy, but because you waited. Don't wait anymore. The world doesn't need a more talented version of you. It needs a more obedient one. So this is your decree, not mine. Not one you memorize, one you embody, one you build with your actions, one you prove with your days. Write it down. Speak it out loud. Let it mark you like a vow. I act in obedience. I do not wait for the world to choose me. I choose the work. I do not delay when I know the next step. I take it. I do not outsource responsibility. I own it. I act before I feel ready. I rise before I feel strong. I obey what I already know to do. And I build my future, not in inspiration, but in action. That's your creed. That's your compass. That's how you move from potential to purpose. And no one can do it for you. But if you do it, if you live it, you won't just change your life. You'll change your lineage. You'll change what it means to carry your name. You'll break patterns that have kept your family stuck. You'll model strength that your children and their children will rise from. You'll leave a mark not because you were flashy, but because you were faithful. So go. Begin. Not next week, not next year. Now, sit in your chair, own your post, live your mission, and never again ask, who will do it if I don't? Because you'll know. You'll know exactly who was meant to carry it all along. You.